staff regarding technical or logistical support issues only. Finally, I have designated committee staff members to, if necessary, mute unrecognized members' microphones to cancel any inadvertent background noise that may disrupt the proceeding. It's a mouthful. Great. Good morning. Today we'll be hearing testimony regarding the current and projected state of the defense apparatus to counter weapons of mass destruction. The witnesses represent the Department of Defense's extensive infrastructure necessary to comprehensively plan for, track, and mitigate the growing threats which compromise weapons of mass destruction. Even with recent demonstrations by authoritarian regimes to deploy biological and chemical weapons against their own citizens, the threat of WMD is often understood as a high-yield nuclear nation killers. However, emerging biotechnologies and illicit narcotics would be weaponized and present existential threats to the country. Synthetic biological weapons increase opportunity for less sophisticated adversaries to create chemical and biological weapons without requiring funding, infrastructure, or anything that is material historically necessary. Further, the 2021 annual threat assessment provided by the Director of National Intelligence highlights the growing threat from the development of chemical precursors to produce illicit narcotics such as fentanyl, which has already devastated segments of the U.S. population. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown just how devastating biological threats can be. In this case, the novel coronavirus was not weaponized, but it could be. I'm interested in hearing what we're doing to firmly detect and deter these amorphous threats. These threats are exacerbated by the rapid proliferation of accessible technologies, which are often easily accessible or commercially available, creating an omnipresent threat that must be considered strategically while preparing to confront the threats tactically. With that, let me introduce our four witnesses who are responsible for the modernization of the department's CWMD strategy, policies, and programs to reflect today's threat environment with capability and the needs of tomorrow. We look forward to hearing their testimonies regarding this critical topic. The Honorable Jennifer Walsh, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Global Security. The Honorable Brandy C. Vann, Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense Program. And Vice Admiral Timothy Samanski, Deputy Commander of U.S. Special Operations Command. And Dr. Reese M. Williams, Acting Director, Defense Threat Reduction Agency. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I look forward to your discussion and will now recognize Ranking Member Kelly for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your opening remarks and your leadership in organizing this morning's posture hearing. Today, we will hear from four experts across the the lot of bad actors, China, Iran, North Korea, and various terrorist organizations that I look forward to hearing about during this session. The continued use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime, poisoning of Alexei Navalny and Sergei Skripal by Russia, and research of biological weapons by China are just a few highlights of this threat. A growing concern brought to the forefront from the ongoing coronavirus pandemic is the threat of biological weapons directed at our military and private citizens. The risk of weaponized aerosol fentanyl is just one example of many alarming and growing threats. I'm interested to hear from our witnesses today on what we are doing to not only identify these types of threats, but also what we are doing to mitigate the threats both from our deployed troops and our citizens here in the homeland. I am also interested to hear our witnesses' views on the global threat posture, especially in the context of great power competition and potential for kinetic engagement with adversaries like China. Lastly, I am deeply concerned about how the Biden administration's budget will affect our overall counter weapons of mass destruction preparedness. The ongoing use of chemical threats, coupled with the effects seen from the coronavirus, illuminate the direness of this, and it seems like failing to properly invest in these resources will have grave consequences. I want to thank our witnesses in advance for their time today. I look forward to the continuing work with our Counter WMD experts during the 117th Congress to ensure we are appropriately postured to meet and defeat the threats shaped by weapons of mass destruction. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Kelly. I greatly appreciate your comments and dealing with me. Next, thank you. And now we're going to move on to questions and hearing from our witnesses. We'll start with Mrs. Walsh. You're now recognized.
Thank you. Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the subcommittee, I am honored to testify on the Department of Defense's efforts related to countering weapons of mass destruction, or CWMD. DOD's CWMD mission is to dissuade, deter, and when necessary, defeat actors of concern who threaten or use WMD against the United States and our interests. I work alongside the members of this panel to develop the policies, strategies, capabilities, and expertise needed to accomplish this mission. My written statement describes the WMD threat landscape, and I want to emphasize that the department continues to improve its ability to dissuade, deter, and defeat these threats while maintaining the ability to respond to and mitigate the effects of WMD use. We are taking action to meet WMD challenges, and as the nature of WMD threats is evolving, we know we have more work to do. The department has 3 lines of effort to organize our work to counter WMD threats: prevent acquisition, contain and reduce threats, and respond to crises. To prevent acquisition or contain existing threats, the department leverages its unique tools and expertise in support of a whole-of-government approach to mitigate the risk of global WMD proliferation and threat actors' pursuit of WMD advancements. Examples include supporting global norms under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, remaining postured to conduct WMD interdiction and preparing partners to do so, and implementing United Nations sanctions to prevent North Korean illicit trade. Second, the department leads the Cooperative Threat Reduction, or CTR program, which works with partner nations to secure and eliminate WMD and WMD-related materials. The DOD CTR program is active in more than 30 countries and has helped a number of these to more rapidly identify and respond to COVID-19. CTR is called the Nunn-Lugar program after the 2 visionary senators who championed its creation. And I want to thank Congress for its continued support for CTR, which has made and continues to make valuable contributions to U.S. and global security. Third, we develop the capability and capacity of the joint force, allies, and partners to operate in a chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear, or CBRN, contaminated environment. As the department increases focus on competition among great powers, developing the capabilities necessary for us to fight and win in a CBRN contested environment in those theaters becomes critical. The department also works with our allies and partners to confirm that U.S. CBRN defense capabilities are interoperable and to encourage partner nations to share the burden of CBRN defense. Achieving effects across this mission space is a department-wide effort, and we must make hard choices about how we prioritize our activities and investments. The DOD CWMD Unity of Effort Council brings together 20-plus stakeholders across the department to collaborate on CWMD policy and strategic goals. In 2020, the Council helped create inaugural department-wide CWMD priorities approved by the Secretary of Defense. In 2021, we are conducting an implementation review to assess department-wide alignment with these priorities and guidance. As administration officials direct and develop new national and departmental strategy reviews and guidance documents, DOD's CWMD stakeholders will be focused on addressing the dynamic CWMD threat and ensuring that it gets space in these documents, including posturing the department to mitigate biological threats more effectively and improving readiness for CBRN challenges in Europe and Asia. Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and thank you for your continued support for the CWMD mission. I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Walsh. Now let's move to Dr. Van.
Good morning, Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Kelly, and the distinguished members of the subcommittee. It is an honor and a privilege to testify before you today on behalf of the men and women of the Department of Defense who comprise the United States Counter Weapons of Mass Destruction enterprise. These dedicated Americans work tirelessly to defend our brave service members, the nation, and our international partners and allies from the increasing threat posed by the most devastating weapons created. I would also like to thank my fellow witnesses for their dedication and commitment to our joint enterprise through which we are able to defend the nation and our warfighters from WMD. The CWMD enterprise ensures that the United States maintains its enduring technological advantage when countering present and emerging threats. The NCB office, including the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, is responsible for ensuring the department maintains the capability and readiness to counter WMD across the threat landscape. To that end, the NCB office is aligning ourselves to meet the direction given by the President's interim national security strategic guidance and the Secretary's 3 priorities. Our efforts will enable us to close today's gaps, rapidly mitigate vulnerabilities, anticipate emerging threats, and strengthen our domestic and international partnerships. But the pace of technology continues to move faster and faster, and as a result, the players on the world stage are shifting, the conflict landscape is changing, and so are the hazards that we all face, making our jobs ever more complex. Overcoming these changes and the emergence and re-emergence of unique CBRN threats requires the department first understand that emerging threats landscape and then develop adaptive capabilities to respond to these threats as they arise. In doing so, we can ensure that the joint force can fight and win in CBRN contested environments, prepare for surprise from emerging threats, and reduce the risk that they pose. To modernize the force, the department will work closely with Congress as we shift emphasis from legacy systems to cutting-edge capabilities. We are moving to get ahead of the threat by anticipating and understanding the convergence of novel science and technological advances. And as a part of layered defense, we can deny the effects of WMD by developing and fielding a wide range of defensive equipment. Further, fields such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, additive manufacturing, and rapid medical countermeasure development all provide us an opportunity to adapt our defense capabilities quickly and effectively. We should embrace the technological revolution within the private sector and lead game-changing technology advancements to ensure our warfighters are best prepared for the future threat. Finally, the NCB enterprise will expand our collaborations with our interagency and international partners, as well as the private sector, to spur innovation, deepen interoperability, and leverage best practices. Our strong relationships with our allies has brought us incredible value to our ability to protect, detect, and mitigate our forces against WMD threats, and have informed great strides in our ability to develop and acquire technologies for our force. The NCB enterprise remains focused on anticipating the future threat by closing capability gaps and ensuring the joint force prevails in a contaminated environment. We will continue to remain behind the warfighter and ahead of the threat to ensure our joint force's ability to survive, operate, and regenerate combat power in the future. On behalf of the NCB enterprise, I would like to thank the committee for its support and dedication to improving our capabilities to address the current and emerging threat space. Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Kelly, thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Van. Next, we'll have Vice Admiral Samanski.
Good morning, Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to represent the United States Special Operations Command today. On behalf of General Clark, it is my privilege to join Ms. Walsh, Dr. Van, and Dr. Williams at this hearing on how we work together to address some of the most critical national security challenges facing our country. The 2017 Unified Command Plan directed U.S. SOCOM to coordinate the CWMD mission across the department, and General Clark has sustained that strategic course. The 2021 Unified Command Plan reiterates U.S. SOCOM's responsibility for planning the department's CWMD efforts as directed by the Secretary. We conduct strategic planning, assess the department's execution of the CWMD campaign, make recommendations to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Secretary of Defense, and sustain a DOD-wide functional campaign plan that enables the joint force to improve coordination in countering transregional WMD threats. The landscape of nuclear, chemical, and biological threats has continued to evolve over this past year. We monitor and analyze progression of existing and over-the-horizon WMD programs closely, with essential support from the Defense Intelligence Agency. The classification level of this forum limits the detail I can provide from our vantage point, but news headlines are a good indicator of the complexity and the nature of the threat. We have seen norms against the use of chemical weapons continue to erode following Russia's attempted assassination of a former Russian intelligence officer with a Novichok nerve agent in the United Kingdom in 2018, and more recently, the attempted assassination of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny with another Novichok nerve agent in August 2020. China, meanwhile, is continuing the most rapid expansion and platform diversification of its nuclear arsenal in its history, and intends, as the Director of National Intelligence made clear in this year's annual threat assessment, to at least double the size of its nuclear stockpile during the next decade and to field a nuclear triad. And finally, COVID-19 pandemic is a stark reminder of our collective vulnerability to biological threats. Clearly, WMD are complex transregional challenges that demand the application of specialized expertise and authorities across our government, as well as our foreign allies and partners. The Department of Defense plays a unique and critical supporting role to our interagency colleagues, especially at the Departments of Energy, State, Treasury, and Commerce, as well as our law enforcement entities, to prevent and contain WMD threats, even as we prepare to respond to WMD crises. We coordinate, therefore, across not only the Department of Defense, but also with interagency colleagues and foreign allies and partners, without whom achieving U.S. objectives would be exceedingly difficult. We also work closely with the Joint Staff, combatant commands, and services to regularly assess the Department's CWMD campaign and ensure the Department's plans appropriately address changes in the WMD threat environment. We strive to improve our methodology and ensure it provides timely, reliable, relevant, and actionable information to support senior department decision-making. Our aim is to better support senior leaders charged with employing our joint force today, developing and preparing it for tomorrow, and helping to design a military that is ready to fight and win against both current and future WMD threats. In closing, General Clark and I would like to thank the members of this subcommittee for their support of this important national security mission. It is a privilege to work together with our colleagues to keep our country safe from the threat of nuclear, chemical, and biological threats. We look forward to our continued partnership with them, with members of Congress, and with our interagency and international partners to ensure our safety now and into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral. And now we have Dr. Williams.
Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Kelly, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for your continued support of the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, or DTRA. On behalf of the nearly 2,200 members at DTRA, I'm proud to appear today alongside my fellow witnesses to talk about our unique role enabling the Department of Defense, the U.S. interagency, and our many international partners to counter and deter weapons of mass destruction and emerging threats. The Department of Defense established DTRA to integrate and focus the department's expertise against the real and ever-evolving threat of the proliferation and use of weapons of mass destruction, or WMD. Under national and departmental policy and guidance, and through close collaboration across the department, interagency, and our international partners and allies, DTRA delivers innovative capabilities that ensure a strong, protected, and prepared joint force. Part of DTRA's unique value stems from our dual roles as a defense agency and a combat support agency. In our defense agency role, we respond to requirements from the services as well as from the DOD offices, including the Undersecretaries of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, Policy, and Research and Engineering. These lines of authority give us strategic roles in the counter-WMD fight through nuclear mission assurance, treaty verification, building partnership capacity, and cooperative threat reduction, among many key programs. In our combat support agency role, DTRA responds to the combatant commands and joint staff requirements, offering subject matter expertise, operational analysis, and material and non-material solution sets in support of counter-WMD planning and operations. These roles on behalf of both national security policy and the warfighter, enable us to integrate efforts such that at home and abroad, we deliver mission success to detect, deter, and defeat WMD and emerging threats. I cannot overstate that people are DITRA's most valuable resource. Our staff includes world-class scientists developing therapeutics for emerging pathogens, chemical threats, technical linguists that help find common ground in complex international engagements, tactical specialists securing dangerous weapons and materials, and subject matter experts on call 24/7 to provide real-time expertise and decision support analysis to all levels of government. DITRA's military personnel ensure that we maintain a close alignment with warfighter requirements, and our capabilities are further amplified by our forward presence at the combatant commands, within task forces, and at key interagency locales. In addition to its unparalleled workforce, DITRA is an agency characterized by partnerships and collaboration. A center of excellence for global counter WMD expertise, DITRA works closely with technical peers in academia and in industry. We team with interagency partners like the Departments of State, Energy, Homeland Security, and Health and Human Services, and engage equally well with international partners. This network, spanning the breadth of the counter WMD and emerging threats enterprise, allows DITRA to use its unique expertise to wide-ranging effect, providing integrated solutions across the spectrum of competition and conflict. There are few greater challenges to U.S. national security than those posed by WMD and emerging threats. As the globalized threat landscape evolves, DITRA's uniquely skilled workforce and robust collaborative network of partners are ready to evolve with it, continuing to safeguard the lives and interests of the U.S. and our allies abroad. Thank you for your time and invitation to participate today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Williams, and thank you for hosting us a couple of weeks back. We're going to now move on to the question period. Each member will have 5 minutes to ask questions. We will alternate between minority and majority, and I'll take the first question. We can only defeat the threats from weapons of mass destruction with collective action in concert with our allies, partners, as well as international bodies. I'm concerned that we are not working as closely as we should with countries such as South Korea, India, and Japan. How closely are we working with South Korea to succeed in the CWMD mission? And is there anything preventing you from sharing and collaborating with our friends in South Korea? And then lastly, how prepared, well, we'll just go that. Let's just start with those two questions. And can we start with Dr. Van and then Ms. Walsh? We could answer my first two questions. And if you need me to repeat them, please just ask.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Gallego, for that question. I think that it's important to say that when we're developing technologies for our joint force, we do work with our allies and partners significantly, in order to assess and test equipment and integrate our forces. Specific to Republic of Korea, we have active in-country engagements with our allies in Korea that is seeking to not only partner in our readiness, but also in reviews of our capabilities with our Korean counterparts. The rest of it, I guess I will defer to Ms. Walsh for response.
Thank you, Doctor. Ms. Walsh?
Thank you very much. With any of our bilateral defense relationships, the issues that we raise and the capability or capacity development that we work together, it is a bilateral process. And so it's not just about the U.S. offering, it's about another country being a willing partner. With respect to the Republic of Korea, we have very close bilateral relationships, mill to mill, across the chemical, biological, and nuclear cooperation. The Cooperative Threat Reduction Program has activities across the chem, bio, and nuclear space. We are working with our Republic of Korea allies to ensure that we are ready for a WMD contingency. Regardless of what the threat is, the Koreans bear responsibility, we bear responsibility to ensure that what we have committed to each other is on track and that we can deliver those capabilities. We meet annually in a CWMD bilateral forum with our Republic of Korea counterparts so that we can ensure that we have trust and confidence. And then obviously U.S. Forces Korea has daily contact with their Korean counterparts These issues are definitely top of the list of concerns and threats, and therefore these get attention to be sure that we're prepared to work with them. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I apologize.
You had also asked about Japan. With Japan,
Yes.
discussions about WMD are handled through our bilateral relationship channels. The Cooperative Threat Reduction Program is not active in Japan, but I can assure you that we speak regularly about ensuring that through extended deterrence and U.S. capabilities, that these conversations do happen on a bilateral basis with our Japanese counterparts. With respect to India, in addressing biological threats, the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program facilitates a Track 2 biosecurity dialogue. And then through the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, with respect to nuclear issues, we support a Track 1.5 dialogue with our Indian counterparts. Dr. Williams is probably in a better position to speak to the details since he has oversight of CTR implementation.
Thank you, ma'am. Just one other thing.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Yes, please.
No, the only thing I would add, sir, is that as far as the Republic of Korea goes, to amplify what both Dr. Van and Ms. Walsh said, we have very close contact with our colleagues, both on the R&D side of the house as well as in the cooperative threat reduction space. So much so that we recently, last year, just prior to COVID, hosted the chairman of the Joint Chiefs from the Republic of Korea at DITRA for a full day of discussions and cooperative agreements. And then we routinely have teams going back and forth. And we also have an embedded team, as was said, at U.S. Forces Korea that has constant communication with our allies there in Korea.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. And Dr. Van, how prepared are U.S. forces in Korea for CWMD situation, and how prepared are South Korean troops? I was talking to you yesterday, like my WMD experience was, on the way to the Syrian border, basically getting handed atropine and being told to just put this in my leg in case something goes bad, which is not good for me.
Yes, sir. Yes, not optimal for sure. So our forces that are currently in Korea, well, first, let me say what we do to focus our programs is we actually have a service board that sits with us as we develop RDA, research development and acquisition capabilities for the joint force structure. We use that service board to help identify capability requirements for the joint force, as well as help integrate into and across the larger force modernization efforts. So in terms of our capabilities for the joint force for chemical and biological defense, we have rapidly developing capabilities that we're delivering every single day. Last year, we developed over 1 million pieces of protective and detection equipment for our forces. We have layered defense approaches as well. So that goes from everything from detection, both remote and point, as well as diagnostic gear, physiological monitoring, personal protective equipment, as well as mitigation capabilities for disinfection or decontamination of any of our equipment and personnel. In addition to that, we are continuing to invest in medical countermeasures for CBRN threats to get ahead of the atropine and to make both vaccination or pre-treatments as well as post-exposure therapeutics more easily adaptable to new and emerging threats, as well as more effective in its pursuit to mitigate the effects of chemical and biological weapons.
Thank you, Dr. Van. And, Admiral, earlier we were talking about working with our allies. Is there something in our classification process right now that doesn't make it optimal for us to be able to share information with our allies or even across the service in order for us to basically be ready for the CWMD threats of the future?
Chairman, thanks for the question. I think over the years that SOCOM's had the coordinating authority, we've really tried to break down the barriers to sharing information. I know just in the conferences that we coordinate through the year, we always have whatever NDS WMD threat challenge that we're examining that year. We try to have the partners as we have a day. It's usually a 2 or 3 day conference, and we usually have a day where our foreign partners are asked to join and participate in the conference. Now, there always are security classification challenges that we continue to try to overcome. I think a good example is really what we've been doing to help NATO, both in their biological and chemical preparedness and response, as well as their allied tactical publication that allows for more information sharing. But information sharing outside of WMD has always been one of those obstacles to collaboration that really needs to be examined in the moment for the problem you're trying to solve at hand.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I yield to Ranking Member Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, witnesses, for being here.
Ranking Member Kelly, I think I went way more than 5 minutes, so please take whatever time you may need.
It won't take much, Ruben. The department balances the shift in resources between CVO, volunteer organization with global power competition.
Ranking Member Kelly, 1 second. Is it just my connection, but you're breaking up?
Can you hear me?
It's hard to hear Ranking Member Kelly here in the House hearing room.
Okay.
All right. How about now?
Yeah, that's better.
All right. As the department balances the shift in resources between CVO with GPC, what are the most significant capability or resourcing vulnerabilities to the counter weapons of mass destruction mission? And I'll start with you, Vice Admiral, and then the others can chime in.
So the resourcing challenges, I think in General Clark's statement a few weeks back, he talked about the balance between readiness and modernization, and as we shift to take on strategic competition. The CWMD problem set, the way we look at the CWMD problem set, it's robust and it's complex and it's trans-regional. And there's really, as we think about balance of those resources across all of the threat vectors, from the VEO with the most rudimentary applications or developments of a CWMD problem, to the strategic competitors who have advanced capabilities across the biological, chemical, and nuclear threat spectrum. So from a SOCOM perspective, and from I think through a department's perspective, we look at the CWMD challenge. It doesn't really shift across. We have to still look at that challenge across all those threat vectors. So the shift hasn't really changed the way we attack or go after and try to fight the challenge of the CWMD problem set. Over.
Anyone else want to add?
I'd like to join and add that one of the reasons that the Unity of Effort Council undertook a DOD-wide CWMD prioritization effort was because we recognize this spectrum of threats is crowded and that resources are always going to be more limited than the threats will bear. And so by prioritizing the greatest WMD threats and associating those with where the Department of Defense has the exclusive mission to counter, so a leading versus a supporting other U.S. government departments and agencies, it's going to help all of our CWMD stakeholder components focus their investments, activities, and efforts toward those priorities. It does not mean that we are taking our eye off the entirety of the threat spectrum, but it is helping us make smart investments. And one of the things that we continue to look at is where we can get invest or return multiple returns on the same investments, whether it's nuclear, chemical, or biological threats that we're countering. Thank you.
Thank you. And I spoke with 3 of the 4 of you yesterday, and one of my biggest concerns is that as we shift to global power competition, that this is a zero-sum game when we talk about this arena. And it's important that we not only focus on global power, but we also look at violent and homegrown terrorist organizations, which can do us much, much damage. Second, this is for you, Dr. Williams. We've been tracking the SARS-CoV-2 origins and DOD funding to the Wuhan Institute of Virology through its grantee EcoHealth Alliance. I'm interested if and how these can partner of choice for the government agency given its ties to the PLA.
Sir, I'm afraid you cut out for the middle of that question, sir. If you could repeat it, please. Over.
I'm talking about the Wuhan Institute of Virology and tracking the SARS-CoV-2, and I'm wondering what kind of risk assessment or risk analysis we conducted and how Wuhan Institute of Virology became the partner of choice for a U.S. government agency given its ties to the PLA.
Sir, thank you for your question. So as we have looked at this extensively, as you know, sir, there was a request from the Congress to the Department 2 years ago to look at this funding level, as well as again, most recently. We have done a thorough look at all of our programmatic activities to ensure that at least the Defense Threat Reduction Agency's funding to this NGO was not provided, to the best of our knowledge, into the Wuhan Institute of Virology. On top of it, sir, our expertise, both on programmatics as well as kind of our technical expertise, looks at all of our activities that we invest in for these types of NGOs to make sure that the risk for government funding is minimalized and in keeping with the traditions and the boundaries of the federal acquisition process, but equally as importantly, policy as well. I think, Dr. Van, did you want to add anything to this?
I don't have much to add to that. I think that that's a good, good review. But I would like to add that we also across the NCV did a thorough review to identify any potential access or investment into the Wuhan laboratory, and we have not identified any. It is something that we continue to watch to ensure that our investments are not going to places where they should not be.
Chairman, I'm going to ask the last question, but I'm going to ask that they submit for the record where we don't take all the time on the hearing. But I just want to ask how confident each of you are with full appreciation of the chemical and biological capabilities of our adversaries. And if there are gaps, please in writing let us know what we can do to close some of those gaps. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you much. And now you have time to Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope your dog stays off of you this time. So my question is really about legacy, and I might have difficulty asking this because I have legacy thinking myself. So I have to switch my brain a little bit in trying to craft this question. I think it's for Vice Admiral Samanski and Director Williams. And given what we know, what you've testified to regarding synthetic biology, regarding 3D printing, advanced manufacturing, these different technologies that both have uses, good and evil. Who's in charge of the department for ensuring that the women and men in our military understand their uses of these technologies and generally, and then understanding the uses of these technologies in the field? I can think of a mini 3D printing manufacturing, advanced manufacturing plant being deployed with a group of women and men in our military in the field for use for certain purposes. Who's in charge of educating and upskilling these women and men for the uses of these technologies?
So thank you for the question, Congressman Larson. Really, there's a service requirement and responsibility largely for the force generation and how forces are equipped, manned, equipped, and trained. From a coordinating authority from SOCOM, our responsibility is really about the planning, helping the geographic combatant commands plan against how to counter WMD. Then annually, we look and assess against that plan the changing conditions on the ground, the changing threat vectors, the changing situation, and assess if that campaign plan, that framework is adequate and needs to be adapted. So I think that the collaboration between what SOCOM does as the coordinating authority and then what DTRA does, I think more importantly to your question, is that DTRA really gets after the unique solution of those gaps that we identify in that plan against those changing conditions. For instance, we may see a new biological threat. Do we have the diagnostics? And I think Dr. Van was pretty articulate in their opening statement about the range of things that they're doing across the spectrum of being prepared, as well as to maintain consequence, as well as protective equipment capabilities. But largely the man training and equipping aspects for our individuals, for our men and women, are a service responsibility. That's the geographic combatant commander's responsibility for how we incorporate the plan as it relates to the threat in their region.
So do we have to rely on the services then to generate that requirement if we see it otherwise, if we see that they aren't doing that?
No, sir. Often we will help generate that requirement for them. In fact, this year, this is the first year that SOCOM has done a comprehensive, from a coordinating authority lens, has submitted a requirements, broad-based requirements piece for DOD to and each of the geographic combatant commanders to the DTRA.
Dr. Williams.
Sir, so as the Admiral said, sir, yes, we ingest that requirements from the services as well as from the geographic combatant commanders on a routine basis. We actually get 4-star requirements that come in, and we rack and stack those against the available resources, and again, keeping with policy to make sure it's there. As the Admiral just said, I literally sent last night to General Clark interim response on that requirements letter that came in earlier this spring. So what we end up doing is also as part of our engagement with the services and their equipment train aspect of things, we make sure we bring that cutting edge technology knowledge back into their training courses. A specific example of that, sir, we actually run the Defense Nuclear Weapons School, which trains all the nuclear aspects of that.
Dr. Williams, anything more, please, for the record? And I will have questions for Dr. Van, Ms. Walsh, regarding your definition of legacy, as well as more on the prioritization efforts of the Unity of Effort Council. I think we're probably going to be interested in the outcomes of that. So with that, I'll develop for the record, Mr. Chair, and I'll yield back. I'll yield back none of the time I have left.
Thank you, Representative Larson. Now we have Representative Scott next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. The topic kind of really better discussed, I think, behind closed doors, but I want to encourage my colleagues to get up to speed if you're not on the ABMS system, and some of the potential gaps, or not potential, but the very real gaps that we have in the ability to pick up weapons that could and would be used against the United States if we were to find ourselves in a conflict with Russia or China. The systems are smaller, they're significantly faster, and that means we've got to pick them up with systems that we use in space. And I'll mention a couple of my concerns with that. Is that a few years ago we were dependent on rockets from Russia to actually launch satellites as the United States, and I'm happy to use the private sector to help us launch satellites, but I do think that we need to be self-reliant and not dependent on the public sector to do that. And so that's one thing that I hope that the agency, the Defense Department, will continue to look at, is making sure that while publicly traded companies are fine to use during times when we're not in conflict, what would happen to our ability to launch if we were dependent on publicly traded companies during an all-out war with Russia and China. As we talk about ABMS versus the legacy systems, and Admiral, this is predominantly for you because you've been one of the guys on the ground as a special operator. I'm very concerned about the communications aspect of the new systems, and as we move to space, are you confident that that we can handle the communications from space and not necessarily from aircraft for our special operators?
Congressman, thank you for the question. Space and communications, and as we think about strategic competition, I think it's a problem set we think about often. You're right, as special operations has historically been dependent on robust tactical communications, and a lot of that's based on space architecture. I would also say you're right that this would be a better discussion in another setting at another time. But let me say this: I think it's important that we run scenarios. In fact, we just run a scenario down at SOCOM, not related to CWMD, on a day without comms. And so how do we plan for everything from our tactical to our strategic comms to take and survive a hit? So in good military planning, as you know, we do most likely courses of action scenarios, and we do most dangerous. And so what do we need to, what are the gaps in things like quantum computing, communications at the edge? And so we're kind of going through that analysis now, and how resilient and how resilient does that comm infrastructure have to be? Obviously, our communications our space communications are important, and I think we're taking a hard look at how we will be able to fight and win in a contested or denied comm environment.
Space is going to be contested as well, and I understand our concept. I won't get too much into it. I actually like the concept, but I do want to make sure that, you know, if we did end up in a scenario where we needed to be doing a lot of launches, that we would not be totally dependent on publicly traded companies to do that. And we got ourselves in a bind a couple of years ago where we were dependent on Russian rockets to actually launch our satellites. And I hope that that's something that we just pay attention to. It's a mistake we made in the past. We don't need to make in the future. I'll mention one last thing for my colleagues on the Democratic side. In the president's speech, he mentioned a DARPA-like program in the National Institute of Health. I'm not so sure that it would be better served to the general public if we did a National Institute of Health type program under DARPA, so that we did effectively the same thing the president is asking for. But the model and the leadership of DARPA seems to work very well, and I don't see why we can't increase that funding over there with a specific focus on health. With that, my time is up, as you just heard, and so I appreciate all of you, and I look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you, Representative Scott. Impressive that you keep your own timer. Now let's move on to Representative Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank our witnesses. Public reports, including a very recent one with the National Academy of Sciences, that have detailed the threats behind some directed radio frequency energy weapons, how that can be used. Are you doing any research or involvement in that? in terms of the scope of your work?
So I had trouble hearing the question, understanding the question.
I'll try again. Public reports, including the National Academies of Sciences, have talked about directed radio frequency, microwave, kind of weapons, energy weapons that were used. Are you in your capacities dealing with that subject matter? So what kind of research or methodology do you have in terms of reacting?
So
Were you able to understand that question?
I believe so. Thank you.
Okay.
The Department of Defense is aware and supporting a whole of government effort looking into those issues. This is another topic that we'd be happy to discuss in a different setting.
There are, though, however, national publications done, for instance, the National Academy of Sciences. So can you just comment generally on whether they present a real danger?
What the National Academy of Sciences report assessed is definitely something that we are continuing to look at. It was directed at the request, I believe, of the Department of State. And so we are taking that report and its findings seriously, and it's part of what we are looking into in cooperation with the State Department and other parts of the U.S. government.
All right. I realize that we probably will have to deal with more of this in a classified setting, but thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Keating. And I now actually lost track. Who's next? Give me 1 second, please. Representative Bacon, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all of our panelists. I appreciate your leadership. My first question is to Ms. Van. Is Iran your number one threat for nuclear proliferation? Thank you.
Actually, I think for that conversation, I would defer to my colleague from policy.
Thank you very much. When it comes to proliferation, we have great concerns about China. China has lax export controls. It is not a country that exercises in great transparency in reporting to international bodies that it has signed up to report to, but also just in being good stewards of public information sharing. So we do have concerns about China, the proliferation that could support WMD activities across the board of items coming out of China and China not responsibly monitoring what is going where. Obviously, we look at any number of proliferation concerns when it comes to nuclear. This could include just fissile material, radiological material. Iran is not on my. It's not my number one proliferation threat. Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program. So there are other nuclear weapons.
But I think what I was trying to get to is, and I think you answered it. I believe a very likely recipient of that proliferation. So that was the intent of my question. Frame that way, is that a concern? Iran working with China?
I would want to take that conversation into a classified conversation, sir.
We do know in unclassified documents that China did help Pakistan helped out North Korea. So I am concerned about what we're potentially seeing with Iran as well. Just this week, DIA said that Al-Qaeda is being safeguarded in Iran. In an unclassified report from DIA, are we concerned about Iran colluding with Al-Qaeda and other forms of WMD?
Sir, we have great concerns about any number of WMD threat actors. from state-based through non-state actors and violent extremist organizations. We rely on the intelligence community, DIA, leading member of that, to help inform our policy considerations of where are the threats, who has the intent, and where these are colliding. So while I can't speak specifically to the DIA report you were referencing, I can say that we are mindful of and watching where there are these alignments of VEOs and state actors of concern.
I think it was very leadership is not Iran, that they're trolling out from Iran. That's a concern. I want to go with that. Maybe one follow-up question for Dr. Williams. It's a little off topic, but what is the status of the Open Skies Treaty? The administration's given mixed signals on this. The OC-135 aircraft are being taken to the boneyard, and yet the administration is saying that open skies may not be done.
Sir, thank you for that question. I would really defer that one to Ms. Walsh from a policy perspective on the future of open skies.
Thank you. I think this is one that's under review right now, and so I'm not in a position to speak to that, but I'd be happy to consult with my colleagues who have the lead for the Open Skies Treaty and circle back with you and your team, sir.
Thank you. I'll just saying we're taking the boneyard. It seems to be making a statement there, but then to say that you maybe have not abandoned open skies, it's mixed signals. I surely would like to know where we're going with that. So thank you very much. Now yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bacon. And Chair Gallego had to step away for a moment, so I will be standing in for him. And it just so happens I'm next on the list, so I'll yield to myself to ask some questions here. I just want to thank the witnesses. The ODNI annual threat assessment has said that China, and you all said it in your opening, that they're undertaking one of the most rapid expansions and platform diversification of its nuclear arsenal in history, and has pretty much indicated they're not interested in any arms control agreements. Also, Ms. Walsh, you just mentioned that it's been difficult to work with them due to lack of transparency and other such things. While I recognize the conversation about their nuclear arsenal might be better suited for a classified setting, what I do want to ask about is an area where they exhibit some of the exact same behavior of lack of transparency, lack of cooperation, and that's in the area of their fentanyl production. And I just hosted a panel featuring witnesses from the DEA and ONDCP regarding China's role in America's opioid crisis. They've been sending precursor chemicals to countries like Mexico, where they're made into fentanyl at labs and then mixed with other illicit drugs before they make their way to our homeland, where they kill Americans and are destroying communities all across this country. So, and I think the threat assessment also highlights that Mexico will certainly make progress this year producing high quality fentanyl using these very chemical precursors from China. So the question is to Ms. Walsh and Dr. Van, how is the department modernizing its capabilities to track the production and shipment of such chemical precursors from Asia to the Western Hemisphere?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. There are any number of communities across DOD that are looking at this issue just from different perspectives. Our Counter Narcotics and Global Threats Organization, even the DOD CWMD Unity of Effort Council took up the issue of fentanyl. I believe it was 2 years ago now. And so across many threads, we are looking at what are the precursors, where are they coming from? We have bilateral conversations, multilateral conversations to make sure that countries that are the source and origin of these are aware of what's going on underneath their nose, giving them the opportunity and trying to persuade them to take action to regulate, curtail, be more aware, if not cease entirely what it's doing. part of the challenge is that there are very legitimate uses of fentanyl. And so this is the space between the legitimate and then the illicit use with that. And I'll defer to Dr. Van, who's more of an expert on this.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. The fentanyl is as Ms. Walsh said, is an interesting space because it highlights some of the dual use nature of and dual use dilemma that we now face, where we have a legitimate use as well as a potential for nefarious use. In terms of capability development that we have against things like the fentanyl classes, we have a very robust RDA activity to ensure that our joint forces have the right detection equipment to identify, both detect and identify any potential fentanyl in the environment, as well as a diagnostic capability so that you can see when there is a potential human exposure to classes of fentanyls, as well as personal protection equipment, as well as our ability to treat any potential exposure. So focusing specifically on delivering man-portable medical countermeasures that could be utilized by the force if exposed to those agents.
Thank you. This is to the Admiral. You know, it strikes me that when we talk about CWMD or countering violent extremists, or countering transnational organizations that deal in sort of the illegal substances, there are a lot of similarities. Sometimes there are state actors nefariously involved. There are networks of people who are moving illegal money, drugs, and other illegal substances. Are there lessons that can be learned from our decades of working in counterterrorism that can be applied in CWMD or countering narcotics?
Congresswoman, thanks for that question. Yes, there are absolutely lessons learned from the countering violent extremist organizations and the things we've done to build networks to defeat a network. And I think what you've really just described is the basis of our functional campaign plan, which is about pathway defeat. And it's a pathway, whether it's I'm sorry, did you have a question?
We're just out of time, and just to be mindful of everybody else's time, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'd love to get your response through a question for the record, and that's a conversation I'd like to continue at a different time. But with that, I will yield to the next speaker, Mr. Franklin.
Yes, thank you, Representative Murphy. I'm on the road, and I apologize, but I do have some questions. I'm just submitting those to the record, but didn't want to drive and try to ask questions at the same time.
Great. We'll travel safely, and we'll look forward to your questions for the record. Next, I have Mr. Larson.
I think, are we going back to a second round then, Chair?
I think it appears that we must be.
Okay, all right, great. So I'll circle back to some ideas for questions for the record, but for Ms. Walsh, can you speak more particularly to the prioritization efforts and the Unity of Effort Council? What can you share with us about which legacies you're looking at, which are going to survive, which aren't, and honestly, what new technologies that we need to put more time into, which would require us to not put time into other systems?
Our department priorities started with an intelligence assessment of looking at what are the WMD threats to U.S. interests, and the U.S. homeland in particular. Where are those threats coming from? Looking at threat actors, who has the capability, who is trying to get more or different capability, who is modernizing whatever capabilities they already have. On top of the intelligence analysis, we looked at policy considerations as well. We blended these to assess what are the threats more than a specific technology. It's about the threat actor, because it's the actor who will use any given technology or capability. and that's what we have to counter. So while I'm not able in this environment to walk you through what those priorities are, we would certainly be happy to have a follow-up conversation with you and share those priorities. They differentiate because it could be that one actor has is further along in one type of posing one type of WMD threat than another. And so we do look at these by WMD threat and actor, bring them together, and that's how we've come up with our priority list.
Can you answer the question in this environment about relative DOD or other agency investment? Is it going to require us to move money around to not spend as much on X to do Y or Z?
Our priority process did not tease out that level of decision. What I will expect is that as we go through an implementation review this year of looking at how are our components applying these priorities into their particular areas of responsibility, I think that's where we will start to determine if we have more, fewer, or different investments to make. But this is also where we're going to look at, can we get multiple returns on similar or same investment?
Yeah. So I have a definition of legacy investments in the DOD after 20 years in Congress. A legacy investment is something that the DOD doesn't want to do, that Congress won't let them get rid of. So just a heads up to, maybe bring us along as you work on this set of priorities so that we aren't surprised as the oversight folks. That would just be my one word of caution on this. I'm open to the smart people at the DOD looking at this. Obviously, it's just sometimes you run into the buzzsaw called Congress because sometimes we don't want to get rid of something, or sometimes we're surprised by the results. So I think it's just important that, especially if it comes down to making not just a priority choice, but also then it gets to where does the money go to invest in that priority. I think just a word of advice on that. And with that, Chair Murphy, I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. And next, I yield to Ranking Member Kelly.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Just given the increased use of chemical weapons in Syria and the asymmetric use of agents by North and Russia, what can we do to deter further use of chemical or biological weapons? What are we doing to ensure international norms against the use of these weapons is not eroded, or to develop new standards to deal with the emerging chem and bio threats?
I don't get all of your question. Please circle back. You did break up a little bit in there, but what I think I heard you say is you're interested in knowing what we are doing to help preserve international norms, prevent further erosion of them on the chemical and biological side. I will say it starts with our own behavior and being a leader through international fora and through our bilateral relationships. In response to Russia's 2018 use of a Novichok, the United States, along with like-minded countries, worked through the OPCW to add the Novichoks to the Chemical Weapons Convention schedule, or the list of prohibited items that country signatories agree that will not be used. We have continued to speak out when we have seen international norms either eroded or flagrantly violated. We do not want any nation to be able to think that they are going to get away with this. And so diplomacy is our first course of action. The Department of Defense stands in support of the Department of State. We work hard to maintain bilateral relationships so that other countries are speaking out when they are outraged by Russia and other nations' behavior as well. We continue to encourage bilateral and multilateral public dialogues about biological agents through biological surveillance, detection, investments that we are making in partner countries. We are helping to build others' capacity to not only be able to detect, but also then to diagnose and contain biological outbreaks that are naturally occurring. We are asking and calling on our partners and like-minded allies to speak out on these issues. COVID has certainly put a premium on that in the last year, that we need to take this seriously. This is not a niche issue, and this is one that can have devastating consequences to security, economic, and just general public health as well.
Very quickly, I asked a question earlier, and I still would like more in depth, because I think a lot of this is going to be classified, but I would like to follow up. It's just how confident are we that we have the full appreciation of the chemical and biological capabilities of our adversaries?
At an unclassified level, I can tell you that we do have concerns because of Russia and China's lack of transparency in meeting its obligations to notify through the Chemical Weapons Convention and the Biological Weapons Convention. That lack of transparency, behavior we've observed over the last year of intentional misinformation about U.S. capabilities, U.S. investments, and partner nation biological laboratories that are serving public health and public good. But Russia and China continue to put out propaganda that's giving false information about what those facilities are and what our partner nations are doing. So I do not have trust and confidence that we know everything. They are not living up to their end of the bargain.
Very, very good. And just very quickly, I'm signing off after this. I want to thank you witnesses again for your testimony here today and for what you do every day to keep this nation safe. With that, I'm signing off. And sorry, I'm trying to multitask, but I'm sure one of my Republicans.
Thank you, Representative Kelly. And then I will, assuming Representative Scott will act as ranking member after you leave. Okay, excellent. Next, we have on my list, thank you for bearing with me. I actually jumped off to attend another hearing. Representative Keating, I have next on my list.
For second round, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Excellent. Then after that, we have Representative Scott.
I don't have any further questions, Mr. Chairman. I just again would love to have the subcommittee come to Robins Air Force Base, look at the ABMS system, and just making sure that we're again, our dependency on foreign sources for rocket fuel and our dependency on the private sector. I just want to make sure that we work through those issues, and that while we can always count on the private sector in times of peace, what would we do in a time of war with regard to our ability to launch? With that, I'll yield. After thanking the members for their service, the panel for their service.
Thank you, Representative Scott. I have Representative Murphy next, if you have a second round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I would just like to let Admiral finish the answer to the previous question I had regarding the lessons off of CT and whether or not we're applying them in this area of counter narcotics as well as counter WMD.
Congresswoman Murphy, we absolutely are applying those lessons. I think you're aware that SOCOM is also the coordinating authority for violent extremist organizations. And we've been obviously in that fight for almost 2 decades. And as I was starting to say earlier, all this is really about pathway defeat. And so when we look at whether it's transnational criminal organizations, counter violent extremist organizations, other bad actors, all are dependent on certain pathways. And we call those the trans-regional enablers. So it's things like comms, finances, and those things. So understanding a network, regardless of what the illicit aspects of what is being transferred, there are absolutely lessons learned from what we've done over the years, and with great participation of our partners, as well as the intelligence community on being able to understand networks, really then try to understand their activities on how they use those trans-regional enablers and how we get after those enablers to actually prevent and or counter whatever the illicit cargo is or whatever the high value leaders that we need to get after.
So as a member who represents Florida, I'm always very concerned with what's going on in Latin America and the Caribbean. And that's an area where there's quite a bit of transnational criminal organization activity. Are you aware of any traditional WMD threats to the United States from state or non-state actors emanating from Latin America or the Caribbean?
Ma'am, thank you for the question. I would prefer to take that question for the record and do it in a more classified setting.
Great, thank you. And then final question for you, Admiral. With the U.S. preparing to withdraw its troops from Afghanistan in September of this year, there are a lot of national security risks that are involved with this decision, as we all know, and I know you're working through a lot of those to mitigate and prepare for them. Can you discuss how you think withdrawal might affect America's counter WMD efforts in Afghanistan and the neighboring countries, especially if the Taliban gains strength and if Afghanistan once again becomes a haven for terrorist groups that have an interest in using WMD? How can we and our allies combat this threat without a significant permanent force presence on the ground?
Congresswoman, again, I'd like to take that one for the record, but I think there will be a significant partner and ally piece. There's a lot going into right now from the State Department with the diplomacy, with a number of the neighboring countries and the Gulf Coalition countries. There's a couple recent intelligence assessments on after withdrawal, and I would prefer to talk about those in a classified setting on where there's a lot of hope for also where the Taliban will be for wanting to be recognized as an international order. So we understand it's a very uncertain time, and at the moment we're really focused on the safe and deliberate retrograde of all the troops and all the other U.S. and foreign personnel that are currently deployed in Afghanistan.
Great. I understand the need to move this conversation to a different classification level and look forward to the opportunity to do that. Thank you to the witnesses today, and I yield back my time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Murphy, Vice Chair Murphy. Now I'd like to move to Representative Walsh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd just like to associate myself with Representative Murphy's remarks and questions, particularly in the wake of the withdrawal. I think one of the things that's being lost in the conversation is that even if all of our best hopes bear out and the Taliban has had a change of heart and decides to be a responsible international actor, no one has been able to explain to me to date, including General Miller, what capability they have to enforce any agreement against Al-Qaeda and half the world's terrorist organizations. On, what capability do they have that 300,000 Afghan army soldiers and 40 Western nations have struggled to do over the last 40 years? But along those lines, so I would certainly welcome if she would have me, if we have a follow-on classified brief, I'd certainly love to participate in that. My question is operationally when it comes to IEDs. Dr. Williams Ditra, I think, has done a great job over the years of training our Afghan partners, our partners in the Afghan Army, in counter IED detection and defeat. My understanding is those trainers and those assets are being withdrawn. What leave behind capability through the Afghan Security Forces Fund, whether it's IED detection kits, nitrate kits, what leave behind capability are we providing to the Afghan security forces through your programs? And I understand there's a State Department, I co-signed a letter for the State Department through its program to also provide funding so that we don't have to go back which I sadly fear that we're going to have to do, but to bolster the Afghan security forces' ability to deal with IEDs, which by the statistics I'm seeing account for 75% of their casualties.
Sir, thank you for your question. One point of clarification, as you know, sir, the former counter IED activities that were done through the Defense Threat Reduction Agency are actually transitioning at the end of this fiscal year into the Army for continuing use for that. In terms of your answer or your question about leave behind, sir, as the Admiral said, I think I would like to prefer to take that in a classified setting so we can have a little more fulsome discussion on that, sir. Okay.
I'll just say I hope that we're not taking that for the record because there's not really a plan yet. I know that I'm sure you're working on it. And I struggle to understand why it's classified if we're handing it over to the Afghans, but that's fine. We'll take that to a different setting. The other piece that I'd like to talk to that I would imagine would be a setting is I know there's a number of classified programs dealing with Pakistan's nuclear program and assuring the security of those assets. So that I would like to request in a classified setting in the status of those programs with no presence in Afghanistan. And then finally, again, probably also classified. So, Mr. Chairman, my questions will be pretty brief, but I'm incredibly concerned and I've asked this question in the past. If we move to any type of conflict on the Korean Peninsula, I understand there's a number of programs with SOCOM, DITRA, and others to secure North Korea's nuclear assets. My concern is what type of deconfliction, if any, that we've had with China, who would obviously also want to assure that those assets are secured. So that would be, I guess, then 3 requests for you in a classified setting. And Mr. Chair, if I could just one more before I close, I'm still not clear if when we have that, why a leave behind capability with the Afghans so that they can detect IEDs. I'm not sure why that would be classified. I mean, that should be, I think.
Would not be possible. I'm sorry, can you repeat yourself?
And so that we can assure everyone that they have that capability. But I'll just take that for the record and I yield. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Waltz. And I believe it is my turn now. Yes, it is. Okay, great. The Department of Defense recently, in 2017, transferred the Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction mission lead from U.S. Strategic Command to U.S. Special Operations Command, signaling a shift in strategy that places greater emphasis on identifying and preventing threats before they metastasize into a crisis. In addition, the Department of Homeland Security established a CWMD office, consolidating numerous offices and functions across the department. How does coordination work at the national level to ensure that CWMD activity, authority, policy, planning, and expertise are operating cohesively, effectively, and efficiently? And what progress has SOCOM made to develop the infrastructure, partnerships, expertise, strategy, and tactics needed to address this mission successfully? Let's start with the Admiral.
Chairman, thank you for the question. So for the years that SOCOM has had the the coordinating authority for CWMD, really the basis of the whole effort is built on the functional campaign plan and building helping the combatant commanders with their campaign plans, the geographical combatant commanders, as I kind of mentioned in one of the opening questions, with the threat vectors and the threat actors in their regions, and how we put that plan together in coordination with the geographical combatant commander, how we assess that plan against the changes to the threat, against the changes to the actors, as well as the environment, and then make recommendations on any material gaps, training deficiencies, et cetera. But what we do in the meantime, back here in DC or in CONUS, is we hold a couple seminars a year called our coordination seminars, our senior leader seminars. We bring together a number of folks from partners and allies to interagency to many members, largely from the Unity of Effort Council across Joint Staff and DOD, and look at a very specific problem. And then we tried to bring in a whole of government approach to how we might answer that, identifying not only the gaps in the department's, in the Department of Defense's capabilities, but also potentially think more use of what Department of Energy, Department of State, Department of Commerce could apply to that problem set. But that from a SOCOM coordinating authority, that's really planning and assessing and recommending. I think I would defer to Ms. Walsh on the Unity of Effort Council and how they use the existing processes to pull the other things that you talked about at the beginning of your question.
Thank you very much, Admiral.
Thank you, Ms. Walsh.
The Unity of Effort Council was created after we recognized that we had a lot of cooks in a kitchen, but we weren't working off of the same recipe. And so through the Unity of Effort Council, we have convened 20 different stakeholder organizations across the Office of the Secretary of Defense, various joint staff components, all of the services, SOCOM as our coordinating authority, and then all of our combatant commands, so that we can raise awareness among these components of what their roles and missions are, what issues that have been stuck or are emerging, and where we need to work together to make sure that these issues can rise to the surface so that senior leaders are aware of threats, opportunities, capabilities we have, but also areas where we need to develop further capabilities or make different investments. And over the course of the last several years, I would argue that we have built not just awareness, but we have built connective tissue that didn't exist previously. And so now we have a phrase of the consolidated buying power of the CWMD community and DOD is yielding benefits. Our plans, our strategy documents, our resource requirements, our understanding of threats, our understanding of where we can have cross-pollination, but also our understanding that some components don't necessarily sit in all of the meetings where resource decisions are made or requirements are decided or prioritized, and then where the strategy documents are. So through the Unity of Effort Council, we have taken both a bottom-up but also a top-down approach in identifying what are those issues that do not get resolved in other existing DoD fora. And through this, we have given rise to a community that is now speaking, that is understanding more, but is also speaking with more of one voice. We expect that we will continue to see dividends from the Unity of Effort Council as the department goes through the strategic review and guidance development efforts this year, whether it's the Global Posture Review, the next National Defense Strategy, and then any number of other reviews that the department is conducting. I am confident that our Unity of Effort Council members will be able to bring WMD issues more into the forefront. Thank you.
Thank you, and Ms. Walsh. And just a general statement, I feel like across the federal government, there is really good unity and conversations happening about countering WMD measures. I worry when it needs to come across down to your local police and state government. One of the things I think we saw from 9/11 was that as much as the federal government is important, it's also your local government that's important in terms of prevention and deterrence, and even unfortunately maybe sometimes reactions. So just want to kind of remind that we keep that in mind going into the future. I have on my list for a second question, if he wants it, Representative Waltz. Is there anybody else that has another question? I don't want to. Representative Scott, do you have any ranking member that anybody from your side? Okay, great. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time to all of our presenters. I did know that there was a lot of things that were said that we're going to have to go for the record or in a classified setting. Please make sure to follow up with our staff to actually fulfill that. I think there's a lot of things that we want to follow up, and there's no need for us to leave things hanging up in the air. Thank you for your time, and I hope to see you all soon.